Greetings to our listeners over there in the United States and the state of Michigan. We have many listeners in Rockford, Hastings, a hug also in California, Virginia, New York, Georgia, Illinois, Florida, in France, and the Netherlands, or Holland is. Thank you for listening. Welcome to the Noticias El Salvador SV podcast. In this space of conversation and reflection, where we explore together current topics of El Salvador and the world.
We are on the platforms Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Deezer, Pandora, on many platforms where the podcast moves.
In PayPal, you will find the user in the description of this podcast. Your contributions make the difference and help us to keep this on the air and in tune.
We are Noticias El Salvador SV. Follow us, share, and comment.
Welcome, everyone, to a deep dive tailored just for you. We're focusing specifically today on the top national stories, really dominating the conversation here on September 24th, 2025. And what we're seeing, well, it's a study in profound contrast, isn't it? You've got this unprecedented security success on the streets.
Truly remarkable numbers, yeah.
But set against that are some really severe and kind of looming fiscal and economic challenges. They're hitting the national balance sheet hard.
Right. And our mission today really is to get beyond just the headlines. We need to analyze these events, sort of understand the connections, what are the trade-offs being made here, the strategic shifts in how things are governed, and importantly, what do these signals mean for the average person listening? We're tracking this transition from a nation largely defined by, physical violence.
For decades.
Exactly, to one now defined by these really complex, high-stakes policy decisions. It's a different kind of challenge.
And that transition absolutely starts with security and justice. I mean, for a country that historically was almost synonymous with gang violence, the reality right now, statistically speaking, is almost surreal. Let's kick off with that monumental statistical achievement. It's dominating the national narrative. El Salvador has hit 18 days with 0 homicides recorded just this month, September 2025. This isn't just a brief dip, is it? It suggests something more like a new normal being established.
You really can't overstate how significant this number is. I mean, think back. Prior to the current security policies, even getting through a single week without any homicides was practically unthinkable.
Unheard of.
Totally. So now, achieving 18 days in just 1 month, that fundamentally alters the social fabric, the political fabric too. It gives the government immense political capital. It allows them to publicly reiterate that message, that the new generation must avoid returning to the past.
That's a very clear reference.
Oh, absolutely. A direct reference to that era when violence was just endemic and homicide rates were, frankly, among the highest globally. This achievement, this statistic, it becomes the sort of non-negotiable baseline for their entire political future. It's powerful.
And here's where that narrative gets, serious international weight. We saw some quite unexpected, very direct praise from the U.S. president, specifically thanking El Salvador for its successful and professional work in combating delinquency.
And the language there is key, isn't it? Thanking them for helping to encarcelar tantos criminales, to imprison so many criminals. This isn't just, generic diplomatic nicety. This statement directly validates the core method, the aggressive anti-gang strategy El Salvador's been using. It confirms that the U.S. sees the country as a critical partner in fighting transnational organized crime.
Which gives them cover.
It absolutely provides the Salvadoran strategy with significant geopolitical legitimacy. And it probably shields it from some of the international human rights criticisms it faces, because the U.S. priority here seems clear, removing these specific criminal elements. And El Salvador is delivering that on a scale the U.S. seems, willing to publicly acknowledge now.
And that partnership, it wasn't just words. It manifested in some pretty tangible enforcement actions against the core structures of these gangs. What specific actions are really demonstrating this cooperation?
Well, the most significant structural move was the U.S. officially designating the Barrio 18 gang as a foreign terrorist organization. That's a huge step.
So not just a criminal gang anymore.
Exactly. When an entity shifts from that criminal gang label to a foreign terrorist organization, the legal tools the U.S. government has expand dramatically. It allows them to freeze assets, go after international financing, disrupt logistics much more severely. It essentially turns the fight from, let's say, domestic law enforcement into more of a counterterrorism operation. It's a major blow to Barrio 18's ability to operate across borders.
And we saw the real-world impact almost immediately, didn't we? With the deportation of that high-profile gang member.
Precisely. The details around the deportation from the U.S. of this known MS-13 member, known as El Sepultero, the Gravedigger, It highlights that seamless coordination. He was subject to a red notice, an international alert for capture.
So they knew it was coming.
Oh, certainly. And his immediate detention right upon arrival, it just underscores that Salvadoran authorities, likely the PNC, the National Civil Police, were ready and waiting. That's not a coincidence. It's the practical result of that intelligence sharing and the diplomatic validation we were just talking about.
Domestically, though, are the authorities just focusing on rounding people up? Or is the strategy now digging deeper, targeting the structure itself?
The focus definitely feels more structural now. I mean, yes, the arrests continue. We saw 3 men recently condemned to 10 years for drug trafficking, showing successful judicial follow-through. But more importantly, I think, is the Attorney General's office launching this specialized program.
Okay, what's that about?
It's dedicated entirely to training personnel specifically against money laundering and the financing of terrorism. This suggests, a phase 2 of the security strategy. It's about systematically dismantling the financial architecture that kept these gangs afloat.
Hitting the money.
Exactly, hitting the money to make their resurgence financially impossible, even if they somehow manage to keep some illicit networks going.
Okay, so that's the success narrative. But it's deeply complicated, isn't it, by what's reportedly happening within the judicial system itself, especially under this prolonged state of emergency, the regime of exception. We have to look impartially at these reported cases that raise some pretty severe questions about due process.
And this tension, this is really the core challenge to the country's security brand, you could say. The government has to balance this huge public safety dividend they've achieved against adhering to fundamental human rights. And the source material gives us some difficult examples illustrating that struggle.
Like the case of the journalist Mario Guevara. He's been held in detention in the U.S. for 100 days now. And he stated he intends to return with his head held high if he gets deported back to El Salvador. What does this situation really illuminate for us?
Well, Guevara's continued detention abroad, even as he faces potentially being deported back into this, let's say, highly aggressive judicial environment in El Salvador, it keeps an international media spotlight fixed right on the accountability of the justice system there.
And his statement, with his head held high.
It implies a sense of maybe vindication, or perhaps defiance. It suggests he sees his potential legal fight back home as a kind of public stand. So this specific case, it's not just about one journalist, right? It serves as a sort of litmus test for critics watching how the government handles cases involving media figures or maybe political opponents who fall under the regime of exception's broad scrutiny.
And then there is the, frankly, profoundly troubling news about Professor Manuel Mira. He's been identified as victim number 447 of the regime of exception. The reports claim he detailed abuses and a severe lack of medical attention before he actually died in detention.
Yeah, this report is just a devastating counterpoint to those 0 homicide days being celebrated publicly. The reported death of a professor, especially with allegations like abuse and medical neglect swirling around it, it shifts the focus squarely onto the conditions inside that vastly expanded prison system.
So safer streets, but what's happening inside?
That's the question it forces. While the streets might be safer, these deaths in custody, regardless of the official cause eventually stated, they force us to confront the alleged human cost of these security measures. And that total number of reported deaths under the regime, now apparently at 447, it becomes a major talking point for human rights groups, for international bodies. It directly illustrates this complex kind of dual narrative playing out: security consolidation outside, but judicial controversy and serious detention issues inside.
So if we try to synthesize this section, the country's getting praise from the U.S. for locking up criminals, achieving historically low violence, right? But at the exact same time, it's facing this deep scrutiny over due process, over deaths like Professor Mira's. How does the government possibly manage that fundamental contradiction?
Well, it seems they manage it by prioritizing what appears to be the overwhelming public demand for safety above almost everything else. The calculation looks like this. The enormous benefit they get from transforming public safety outweighs the political cost of international criticism or these domestic due process challenges, at least for now.
But long term?
Long term, those legal and institutional challenges, the due process questions, they're likely to generate the most sustained pressure, especially as the government tries to solidify its gains and, normalize its legal framework eventually. But for the time being, the narrative is absolutely defined by that security dividend, while the opposition, naturally, focuses almost exclusively on these allegations about the human cost.
That tension defining the whole political atmosphere, it leads us directly into the massive economic pressures the country is now grappling with. We've hit the deep security issues, so let's take a quick moment for the required update, and then we'll dive straight into the economic and governance hotspots. These are really defining the next phase of the challenge, aren't they?
Absolutely. The next battleground, so to speak.
Wednesday, September 24, 2025. Greetings to our listeners over there in the United States and the state of Michigan. We have many listeners in Rockford, Hastings, a hug also in California, Virginia, New York, Georgia, Illinois, Florida, in France, and the Netherlands, where Holland is. Thank you for listening. Welcome to the Noticias El Salvador SV podcast, in the space of conversation and reflection where we explore together current topics of El Salvador and the world. We are on the platforms Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Deezer, Pandora, on many platforms where the podcast moves.
In PayPal, utspeaker will find the user in the description of this podcast. Your contributions make the difference and help us to keep this on the air and in tune.
We are Noticias El Salvador SV. Follow us, share, and comment.
Okay, moving from the success story in the security sector, we transition now to the economy. And the news here, well, it reveals some severe vulnerabilities, particularly in that traditional manufacturing sector. Yeah, the maquila contraction is a really stark signal of sustained economic trouble. Maquilas, the export-oriented assembly plants, especially textiles, they've been contracting now for over 2 years straight.
2 years. That's significant.
It really is. We saw exports reduced by over $59 million in the latest reporting period alone. That brought the total goods exported by August 2024 down to about $533.4 million. This 2-year decline, it's not just a blip, right? It reflects shifting global supply chains, maybe increased competition from Asian markets, and crucially, a sort of softness in U.S. consumer demand, which is the main destination for these goods.
And the impact?
Well, it directly impacts tens of thousands of industrial jobs and, of course, the foreign currency earnings the country relies on. It's a major vulnerability.
That is substantial economic vulnerability. However, it looks like the government is trying to strategically pivot here, sort of juxtaposing this traditional sector weakness with a pretty aggressive push for energy diversification and maybe more modern infrastructure.
That pivot seems central to their long-term vision, yeah. We saw the legislature approve tax exemptions specifically for projects managed by CEL, that's the Hydroelectric Executive Commission. So it's a deliberate policy designed to attract capital towards these strategic, state-backed energy initiatives.
And the geothermal focus.
Right. That focus on modernization was really amplified by this major meeting they hosted. Experts from 20 different countries all gathered in El Salvador, dedicated entirely to strengthening geothermal energy development. The vision seems clear. They're aiming for greater energy independence and potentially maybe leveraging that cheap, clean energy to support digital economies. Perhaps even large-scale cryptocurrency operations down the line. It signals a real desire to move beyond depending on vulnerable sectors like the traditional maquila industry.
But the most immediate and probably most painful policy challenge facing the average worker right now is this looming pension reform. The proposed changes sound monumental.
They truly are. And the urgency seems driven by a recent actuarial study, one of those mathematical risk assessments. And it apparently suggests major reform measures aren't just, advisable. They're mathematically necessary to keep the system solvent.
And the details. What's being floated?
Well, the big ones include potentially increasing the retirement age by, get this, 3 to 5 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Along with requiring more years of service and also higher contributions from workers.
3 to 5 years is a massive change for any working population. Yeah. Why is this system so vulnerable right now? What's the core issue?
The structural flaw is, honestly, almost impossible to fix without doing something drastic. Here it is. Only 27% of the active population currently saves for retirement through the formal system.
Only 27%?
Just 27%, which means the vast majority of the population works in the informal economy, contributing absolutely nothing to the formal pension system. This creates this deeply imbalanced ratio, right? You have a small base of formal contributors trying to support the eventual number of retirees the system has to cover.
So the math just doesn't add up.
Exactly. If this system is going to avoid basically going broke, the government has to increase the required input. And that means asking that 27% of formal workers to work longer and to pay more. That actuarial study essentially provides the undeniable data to justify what is obviously a politically toxic choice.
But can the government politically afford that pressure right now? I mean, they've championed job creation, but raising the retirement age immediately undermines the short-term benefit of a more stable job market, at least for that formal sector.
That is the political tightrope they have to walk. Raising the retirement age is incredibly unpopular anywhere. But waiting longer just means the necessary increases will have to be even more severe later on. The urgency now is driven purely by that structural imbalance. Successive governments have failed to really formalize the economy, and now the formal sector is left bearing the burden.
So is there any way around it?
Well, a critical question is whether the government can somehow accelerate job formalization before they enact the retirement age increase. If they could broaden the contributor base significantly, that might soften the inevitable pain. But without a major influx of new, formal contributors, that 3 to 5 year increase seems almost unavoidable just to keep the system financially viable for the next few decades.
Shifting gears a bit, but still on governance and infrastructure.
Yeah.
We're seeing some pretty severe financial crises bubbling up at the municipal level. The Mides debt saga really exemplifies this.
Oh, the Mide situation is, it's basically a public health and governance disaster waiting to happen. Mides, which is the main waste management company for the metropolitan area, is owed a staggering $19.8 million by San Salvador municipalities.
Nearly $20 million.
Almost $20 million. And this debt is just crippling Mides' ability to operate effectively. Now, to compound that, the Mides sanitary landfill, the central place where all the trash goes for the whole metro area, has apparently been immobilized by the Fiscalia, the Attorney General's office.
Immobilized. What exactly does that mean when the Fiscalia immobilizes the landfill?
It strongly suggests there are significant legal or maybe environmental or regulatory issues that have essentially halted or at least severely restricted its operations. So think about it. The capital city's main waste disposal site is functionally shut down or restricted because of illegal hold, and the company managing it is facing nearly $20 million in unpaid bills. You have the perfect recipe for an immediate public health emergency if waste collection and disposal just grinds to a halt.
It really illustrates.
It illustrates extreme financial mismanagement and operational breakdown right at the municipal level. Yeah, just after we were celebrating national security successes. Quite the contrast.
And in stark contrast to these immediate infrastructure failures, the government is simultaneously looking at major future urban development, specifically studying the feasibility of an aerial cable car system in Soyapango.
And this is the dichotomy you see in governance today, right? Managing immediate pressing crises while also planning these ambitious, futuristic projects. Soyapango is a massive, incredibly congested urban area. An aerial cable system, well, it's designed to provide rapid, cheap, and hopefully environmentally friendly relief to traffic congestion. It could potentially serve 1 million residents or more.
So it's a big vision.
It signifies recognition, at least, that traditional road projects alone just cannot solve the urban mobility nightmare in the capital's periphery. The fact they're doing the feasibility study shows a commitment to pursuing these high-impact, modern infrastructure solutions, even amidst the current mess.
That tension between debt and development, it seems to be driving conflict in commercial spaces, too. Like that contentious eviction of merchants from the Mercado Cuscatlán.
Yeah, that eviction is a really powerful sort of anecdote about financial authority clashing with small business. The alcaldía, the municipal government, kicked out the merchants, apparently because of a $1 million debt dispute with the company that leases and manages the market.
So the merchants are caught in the middle.
Exactly. This move just highlights how these financial disputes, even complex ones involving layers of public and private management, have immediate, sometimes brutal consequences for small business owners, for the merchants just trying to make a living. It reflects a pretty aggressive stance by municipal authorities to resolve financial liabilities, perhaps prioritizing debt recovery over the immediate stability of those small commercial enterprises.
And finally, on this governance front, what were the notable policy movements concerning health and utilities this week? Anything stand out?
Two things, really. In health policy, the government proposed a pretty significant reform, basically authorizing private health centers without needing board approval first by declaring them of public utility.
Public utility, what's the effect of that?
It's designed to drastically streamline the process of opening private health facilities. The aim seems to be rapidly expanding healthcare capacity by just cutting through a lot of the bureaucratic red tape. That public utility designation essentially fast-tracks them.
Okay, and the second thing?
The second was almost comical if it weren't serious. The news that electricity service had to be restored to the rural police station in La Union. after it was suspended. Not for technical reasons, mind you.
Let me guess.
Lack of payment. Yeah. This tiny detail, it provides a perfect microcosm of the governance problem, doesn't it? Even essential public safety infrastructure, like a local police station, can have its lights turned off because of localized financial mismanagement. It just demonstrates a certain fragility in basic operational funding, even for critical services.
All right, let's turn our attention now to social dynamics, culture, sports. What's happening on that front? It looks like local governments are making some, well, let's say telling spending decisions. San Salvador Este, specifically Soyapango, is providing a massive morale booster.
They are indeed. San Salvador Este has allocated $250,000, $250,000 just for its patron saint festivals.
Wow, $250K is a lot for festivals.
Yeah. It's a substantial investment, yeah. Especially when you consider the infrastructure debt and waste management issues we were just discussing in that same wider area. This allocation specifically includes prepping for a big concert by the Cumbia Kings.
Ah, okay. Big name draw.
Right. And this type of spending, it's classic political strategy, isn't it? You prioritize visible cultural celebration, mass entertainment. It's a morale booster, a political goodwill builder, especially for a community like Soyapango that has recently lived through some pretty intense security operations. It's a deliberate focus on maybe quality of life and normalizing social interaction again.
Moving to the education front, there seems to be a clear push for greater discipline, standardization, extending even to how students look.
Absolutely. We're seeing new school rules being rolled out right as schools initiate the Civic Month festivities. This includes implementing a new demerit system, but what's particularly noteworthy and getting attention is the specific ban on the popular Edgar haircut.
They banned a haircut.
Explicitly prohibited it, yes. This hairstyle, apparently very popular among the youth, is now off limits in schools. It really reflects a broader policy push towards stricter codes of conduct, more discipline, and a kind of standardized presentation within the public education system. It sort of mirrors the government's overall focus on order and control across society.
A statement that order prevails even over teenage fashion trends.
Seems to be the message, yeah.
Amidst all these policy details, though, we absolutely must acknowledge the heartbreaking reminder of persistent risks that exist outside of gang violence. The tragic news of a 3-year-old child found drowned in San Francisco Gotera after being swept away by a river.
Yeah, that tragedy is it's a painful reminder, isn't it? That even as the country achieves this remarkable stability regarding human-on-human violence, it remains highly vulnerable to natural threats, environmental dangers, especially during the rainy season. It just underscores the critical and often understated need for ongoing investment in things like climate resilience and infrastructure protection to prevent these kinds of losses, particularly in vulnerable rural areas.
We also got some important data concerning internal social dynamics. A statistic indicating that 15% of children report being victims of bullying in their environment.
That 15% figure, that's serious. That's a call to action. While the nation has, dedicated massive resources to eradicating that external threat of gang violence, this statistic really highlights the pervasive internal social violence bullying that kids are facing within their schools, within their communities, every single day.
So a different kind of violence to tackle.
Exactly. It demands systemic intervention, things like psychological support, specialized programs. It suggests that the focus on safety really needs to evolve, maybe from just large-scale military and police operations, to include these more nuanced social and psychological support systems for the youth.
Switching gears to sports now. The national football scene was apparently rocked by both controversy and tribute this week. The controversy centers on a racism scandal.
Yeah, and the reaction was swift and pretty fierce. There was strong editorial condemnation, calling the racist insults directed by some Salvadoran fans toward Surinamese players at the Cuscatlán Stadium shameful.
Deplorable behavior.
Absolutely described as deplorable, completely unacceptable in the sources. This moment really forces the Salvadoran football community to confront these issues of prejudice and sportsmanship head-on, particularly after recent public campaigns urging fans to support the national team, the Selecta, with dignity.
So how has FESFIT, the National Football Authority, responded to this?
FESFIT, the Salvadoran Football Federation, immediately announced they're launching a comprehensive anti-racism campaign in response. This incident, while ugly, serves as a crucial, very high-profile moment, forcing the Federation to align with international standards of conduct and address these deeper social issues within the sporting environment. That campaign feels like a necessary step, both to mitigate potential international repercussions and just to reset the standard for fan behavior.
Okay. On a more somber but highly respected note, the football community is also preparing to bid farewell to a true legend of the game.
Yes, tributes are being planned for the deceased football icon Jaime La Chelona Rodríguez. He's set to receive his final farewell in El Salvador, which really confirms his status as just a giant of national sports history. His passing allows the country to pause, really, and celebrate the legacy of a figure who brought international recognition and a lot of pride to the sport there. It reminds everyone of the tradition and the passion tied to Salvadoran football.
All right, and just a quick look at culture and recognition before we zoom out to the global picture.
Sure. The Vice President, Felix Ulloa, is set to receive the Great Medal of the Andes condecoration. That's a significant international recognition, reflects his political stature and role within the current administration.
Yeah.
And almost simultaneously, the country is finalizing preparations for the Miss Universe El Salvador 2025 Gala, scheduled for September 26th at the Palacio de Cleño.
So high politics and high glamour.
Both putting El Salvador on an international stage this week, in very different ways, yeah.
And finally, in the music world, there was some concerning news about the very popular band, Los Hermanos Flores.
Yeah, apparently the vocalist suffered a car accident. This incident is particularly sensitive because the band is, right now, preparing for a really major international milestone. They're slated for an appearance at Coachella in 2026.
Oh, Coachella. That's huge.
Huge. They'd be the first Salvadoran band ever to perform there. So this accident, it unfortunately draws attention to the fragility, maybe, of this historic cultural moment and the dependence on the health of key members just as they're reaching this peak of international prominence. Hopefully he recovers quickly.
Okay, while our deep dive today has been firmly focused on that national narrative in El Salvador, let's just quickly zoom out for a brief glimpse of the global headlines that captured attention this week. Just a small percentage of our focus, but good context.
Sure, and global politics remains, well, deeply fractured. The former U.S. president's speech at the UN General Assembly was highly charged, to say the least. He claimed European countries were going to hell because of illegal immigration. And he really escalated his rhetoric by threatening to effectively disappear drug traffickers in Venezuela.
Strong words.
Very strong. His statements continue to be this dominant, polarizing force in global dialogue, right? Setting these aggressive benchmarks for nationalist policy and anti-immigration movements worldwide.
And the accompanying White House drama around that visit was almost unbelievable.
It was indeed. That bizarre report that the White House allegedly demanded the firing of any UN staffer who turned off an escalator, supposedly stranding the former president, I mean, it speaks volumes, doesn't it? About the tense relationship between the U.S. executive, or at least that former executive's branch, and the established international bureaucracy, sometimes overshadowing substantive policy discussions with these kinds of personal disputes.
In terms of actual geopolitical mediation efforts, we saw a notable offer emerge from Central Asia.
Yes, Kazakhstan officially offered to host a summit between the Russian and Ukrainian presidents, Putin and Zelensky. This offer signals those ongoing, often quiet efforts by neutral parties trying to facilitate high-level dialogue in that conflict. Though, realistically, the success of such an offer remains highly speculative given the current deadlock.
Shifting to crime and social incidents internationally, the week brought some pretty sobering news from both the U.S. and Europe.
It did. We had the tragic news of a shooting at a migrant center in Dallas, Texas, leaving multiple victims. That immediately raises urgent questions about migrant safety and the whole domestic climate around immigration in the U.S.
And in Europe.
Political instability flared up in Spain as a judge requested the prosecution of the Spanish Prime Minister's wife for alleged embezzlement. That's significant. And then the detention of a 14-year-old boy in France after stabbing a teacher. That just underscores ongoing concerns about violence and security within European school systems.
And the conflict in Gaza continues to exert social pressure far beyond the region itself.
Absolutely. Yeah. Massive strikes and protests were recorded in Italy specifically against the Israeli offensive in Gaza. The size and the disruption caused by these protests, where thousands reportedly blocked major infrastructure, it just shows the continued resonance of that conflict and its ability to mobilize and sometimes destabilize domestic opinion and infrastructure, even in countries far removed from the direct conflict zone.
And finally, just a quick glimpse into the space race before we wrap up.
Sure. China is definitely advancing its space ambitions. They launched satellites from the sea this week, and the crew of the Shenzhou 20 mission is preparing for their fourth round of extravehicular activities, or spacewalks, reflects their commitment to a deep space presence.
And the U.S.?
Meanwhile, the U.S. launched 3 probes specifically dedicated to improving the study of space weather. That's a critical task aimed at protecting vulnerable satellite and communication infrastructure from solar interference. And NASA confirmed its next crewed mission, Artemis II, is still on track to orbit the moon in early 2026. So steady progress on that renewed push for lunar exploration. Hashtags, tag after...
Okay, let's try to unpack this, the ultimate synthesis for today. If we look across all these stories we've discussed, from the consolidation of that security brand externally, the zero homicide count, the U.S. praise to these severe internal fiscal strains, like the looming pension reform, that massive, almost $20 million municipal waste debt. What really stands out to you as the defining strategic shift or narrative of this particular day, September 24th?
I think the defining narrative is one of a really high-stakes transition, a transition from prioritizing physical security to now grappling with fiscal security. El Salvador, you could argue, successfully exported a brand of decisive, effective security consolidation globally. People noticed. However, the internal balance sheets, the national accounts, they are now screaming for attention. The biggest challenges, it seems, are no longer the gangs operating openly on the streets, but the fundamental solvency of institutions. That economic reality check from the maquila contraction, the paralyzing debt crisis in municipalities like the Meaty saga we talked about, and the actuarial necessity of raising the retirement age, it all confirms that the focus has fundamentally shifted, away from military might towards bureaucratic and financial stability. The country is safe, perhaps safer than ever, but is it solvent? That feels like the new central question.
And that economic and governance pressure, that's really the key takeaway for the domestic audience listening, isn't it?
Right.
That discussion about increasing the retirement age by 3 to 5 years is just huge. It strikes right at the core of the social contract.
It absolutely does. And this raises a really important question, maybe the defining question for the next political cycle. If the government must ask formal workers that 27% to work longer, perhaps until they're 63 or 65, how can it possibly balance this, frankly, painful austerity measure with the absolute urgency of formalizing that massive informal business sector? The long-term health of the pension system relies entirely on expanding that tiny 27% contributor base. Asking citizens to work longer before getting a pension is an incredibly tough pill to swallow. The government has to find a compelling way to make the reward of formalization somehow outweigh the immediate cost of these painful but perhaps necessary economic realities. That's the challenge ahead.
Wednesday, September 24th, 2025. Greetings to our listeners over there in the United States, in the state of Michigan. We have many listeners in Rockford, Hastings, a hug also in California, Virginia, New York, Georgia, Illinois, Florida, in France, and the Netherlands, where Holland is. Thank you for listening. Welcome to the Noticias El Salvador SV podcast, in this space of conversation and reflection, where we explore together current topics of El Salvador and the world.
We are on the platforms Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Deezer, Pandora, on many platforms where the podcast moves.
In PayPal, you will find the user in the description of this podcast. Your contributions make the difference and help us to keep this on the air and in tune.
We are Noticias El Salvador SV. Follow us, share, and comment.